Leah, right? Or Leah?
Yeah, yeah.
Leah integrates shamanic practice with the modern business approach. Now, I guess that is where she can step in and clarify.
Yeah, so my name is Leah Sindelar. And just as you said, I am a shaman as well as a business coach. And what this really is kind of this combination, rather than focusing and helping people on strategy-based aspects of their business, I'm more focused on the energetics of their business because I so heartedly believe that a lot of our spiritual world and a lot of our inner life becomes reflected in our outer life. And just at this point in our evolution, having careers, having jobs, all that kind of stuff, that's just a part of our human experience now. So it's sort of going back to these roots of how do we incorporate more of our spiritual life and our spiritual aspects into our business, because we see a lot of practices now that are very focused, in competition and doing like overworking. You have so many people just hustling their way to the top and let's fake it till we make it. You hear all the big all the kind of the attitudes towards business. And so I really feel like it's a part of what I'm here to do is to help people more so integrate a spiritual path into their business and allow their inner wisdom, their inner authority to really guide them when it comes to whether you're just an entrepreneur or whether, you work for a corporation. So that's a little bit about what I do.
There's an interesting juxtaposition between what is a classic business ethic and a shamanic practice, especially animistically, from the approach of how these things can grind on each other, like especially a consumer-based economy, right? Narcissism.
Yeah.
Is it just to say how to reorient our approach to both serve what we really want as opposed to what we think we need to do, something to that effect?
100%. Yeah. I feel like a lot of the advice given is a lot of, oh, this worked for me, so it'll work for you. And it's a lot of what we think we should do, all the things that we see that make people successful. But it's like, okay, if we step back and kind of question what is success, because ultimately I think we want the same thing, and that is like simply to thrive. We want to thrive. And so there's a little bit of a difference in understanding of how do we really get to that point of thriving. And so unless we start doing the inner work, I would say to address, our childhood traumas, to address kind of the what do I say, past life, I would say, even stuff that's, I work a lot with past lives, going into that and seeing how in a way our karma from past lives influences this life in terms of our lessons. So I feel like by working those types of things, we kind of remove those boundaries or those limitations that we keep meeting, those upper limits that we keep meeting in business.
So, oh gosh, there's a lot to go into there. Mechanically speaking, is this well, within your practice at least, do you ever utilize soul retrieval? Do you bring individuals on the guide to acquire spirit guides from the lower or from the upper? Or is this more you acting on behalf of the patrons, practitioners?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely more along the lines of what I practice is more in alignment with the soul retrieval. That's sort of where my journey began. I began with more of just typical healing work with people. And then I started realizing and recognizing that I was going into these trauma loops of pieces of the soul that had been trapped in all these different moments. And so I just throughout that practice, I had my guides in and start teaching me, how to work with these energies. Because I was not raised, in a traditional shamanic culture whatsoever. So all my teaching, all of my guidance, all of my awakening has come from my connection with my guides and with spirit. And so through this, I just started experiencing, recognizing these different trauma loops that people were in. And I was like, okay, now I understand that this is an aspect of soul retrieval. So yeah, that's primarily the area that I work with.
Now, when it comes to, just from my end, doing palmistry and tarot and divination work on behalf of the other, there were always questions about who I would care to like practice with, practice on, so to speak. And it was always tricky because the statement comes down to money. Unfortunately, at times they think that it's about the money, which is really curious. But really, what I was always looking for was somebody who's ready, somebody who's in the place of transition or transformation. And I would assume for you to clarify that, the most ideal thing, because you can work with somebody, but if they can't integrate it, right, then it doesn't mean anything. And to the point where they would almost get up in arms about what you do. It could be critical with what you do, being that they didn't integrate it. Is this relatable?
Very, very much, yes. Because, and it's so funny, when I first started doing these sessions, I used to think, oh, I need to give them so much. Like I need to tell them all the things and uncover all these deep things. And for some people, one, that's extremely overwhelming because they don't have the tools to integrate it whatsoever. So gone through that process of going, okay. And then I kind of scaled back and it's like, and figured, okay, what if I focus on, coming in with a really strong intention, and we only look at the stuff that pertains to that intention that they have. Now, also, I have received just this whole past year, I did a whole year certification course in coaching, which is so heavily focused on integration. So I feel now in my journey, I'm definitely much more prepared for people to sort of set that aspect up and leaving them with action steps, saying, okay, we just did all this. Now, can you kind of regurgitate to me, what are your takeaways? What do you get from this? What do you think you can do also with this information? Because it's one thing to hear it and to conceptually understand it, but the real power for transformation comes with, okay, now what do you do with this information? How do you act? How are you going to go about? And so I've gotten to the process now where I leave people with something a bit more tangible, like a specific action step that they can use to integrate it, because ultimately that's where all the work is. It's like what I bring forward is more of that awareness piece. It's like, this is the tip of the iceberg. But yet and it's funny though, because every time I check in with people and it's like the same thing. They're like, wow, that was such a turning point. And I don't think it's a turning point because they had a session with me. It was more of they were at the turning point. And so I was there. I showed up at that turning point to assist them
As a
in
guide.
that transition.
Yes, as a guide, but only if it's intuitively right and correct, which is dastardly tricky. Because otherwise it's therapy, right? Like it can divulge itself into therapy. There's this very strange note about how the shamanic practice is culturally interpreted. And it's a really wily cultural modality, because it's not known, and for what is known, it's very obscured. So I'm curious from your personal end, how being that this wasn't your original modality, how you're raised, this which I would assume would probably be an Orthodox, somewhat Christian upwelling.
Somewhat, yeah, actually.
Somewhat, as is at least in the fabric around us.
Yeah.
How it first met you, or if it was more of this kind of trickling into your life, or what your impressions of it were, in what state you were in when more of the shamanic wisdoms, or just the idea of shamanism or other ways of thinking being came about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first, even to start off, I would say that even just my understanding of shamanism is always expanding. And there's moments where I catch myself and I'm like, do I even know what this is that I am self-proclaiming identifying as?
Mm,
So I definitely have those moments. And so my journey definitely, it started off when I was really young. I was very much a sick child. And now looking back, I can see that was kind of a telltale sign of shamanic illness, of going through that. And I very much fought my spiritual side. I did not want the gifts. I just wanted to live a normal life,
mm,
right? I was like, I just want to blend in. I'm going to go to college and just like live the very stereotypical flow of a life. And that's genuinely what I wanted because my gifts, my sight, hearing, all that kind of stuff started developing pretty young and it scared me. To be completely honest, it scared the crap out of me. Nobody else around me was experiencing it from what I knew. And so I felt very much alone in the process, which ultimately just wasn't fun. So throughout the years, after having so many experiences that just started building up, it truly was that turned me into a believer of sorts in like the woo-woo and the spiritual. That's what shifted me into going, okay, there really is something here. There really is more to this unseen world than we understand. And it wasn't until the past few months actually going through this certification course, that's what really led to me taking on this role and identifying as a shaman. And I knew it for years. And it was my biggest fear to state it. And I would judge any other woman who had stated it. You know, it was like a classic projection where I'd see some other blonde white girl saying she was a shaman. I'm like, you can't, like, how could you call yourself a shaman? You know, because I had such an identity crisis linked with it. I was like, there is no way in the world I could ever use this term. And it was solely based upon the way I looked and where I was raised, you know, which to the truth of it has nothing to do with shamanism itself. It's about the connection with spirit. It's about the gifts. It's about the work that we have done in past lives, you know? And so I'm also, yeah, I can talk about this. I'm also a walk-in. Are you familiar with that term?
refresh, just as for anybody listening.
Yeah. So when I was 11, I passed, like I basically passed away during a surgery and swapped out souls with a parallel soul. And so I'm basically not the original soul that was born into this physical body. And that was a whole experience with me in college, coming to this understanding, and eventually led me to a moment where I was in ceremony. And I do not currently journey with any hallucinogens, anything like that. I'm more of, I experience a lot without it. So far I haven't
Yes.
felt the need to go there.
Yes.
And so I actually relived the moment of passing in my other body and then waking up here in my 11-year-old self now. And so the combination of all these things coming together, connecting with my guides, and them really bringing it forward, and plus the external confirmations too. I went and did pranic healing and told about myself. And the guy was like, are you a shaman? I was like, no, I'm not a shaman. Are you kidding me? You know, I would get these externals, I would get the spirit. And so it ultimately revolved around me doing this deep inner identity work, shifting that story that ultimately freed me to being able to embrace it now, and embrace it in a way where I don't I've like stopped myself from diving deep into research on traditional shamanism, because I don't want it to, like, I guarantee you probably know way more about shamanism than I do. And you know what I mean? In the traditional sense. And so, yeah.
I'd like to throw in quite a few things here. It's
Yeah.
all great. It's all great. So first off, that identity issue in the very eclectic and eccentric ruffian communities out here, there's like this weird disposition where if you are a creator of some sort, or if you are an observer, you have this specific personality that is very introspective. there comes a tremendous bar to ever identifying as anything. So I saw it with an artist, artists, like at what point do they say they are artists, as this like shiny badge of societal credo, or to say that you are a teacher or that you are learned in this tradition? At what arbitrary point is that proper? And I wanted at least to point to the cultural reaction to the whole thing. It's so strange because this caginess about being like white and taking on the shamanic way, as it is associative with ethnicity. But the trick of that, in what the history of religion shows, we're all that. We all come from that. The Celtic tribes, the Nordic tribes, we are all tribesmen. We are all the delineation of tribal people. And that's not to overshadow, what has transpired in history, but it is to say that there is a collective unification in that connection to spirit. And that's the whole point. And when it comes to keeping with the guide, right? Like, I respect that a lot. Like, that shows a genuine approach, one that is dharmic, as opposed to like following off the boot heels of some tradition, because traditions are only supposed to be there as guides, right? So for us to have to like emblemate, become that tradition, is very wonky. That's a very strange way to go about. And there are many ways that shamans practice, of course. And it's always been that way. In Siberia, where the term shaman is coming from, in the many different tribes there, you would have different shamans ascribed to different specialities. Oftentimes, they wouldn't just be the mecca of shaman, so anyhow, I was like, bam, bam, bam. So I just wanted to go through some of that.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the unknown, which is something I really wanted to get to, the unknown and the trickiness about taking on that approach, right? Because you wouldn't have stepped into this position without courage, some sort of courage, because there are all the answers that society can leave out for you, right? But then there is the journey that takes you through those answers, right? Into having to face the unknown, come up with your own story, and just wing it. So this is a very broad question, free association for you. But could you elucidate, could you elaborate, or could you just like emotionally show how you would project, or how you would make understandable for people this facing of the unknown, to kind of strip the associations with what's been handed to them, right? I know this is super broad, but I hope you see where I'm like pinpricking at this.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Sort of how to develop in a way that courage to go into it, to go into the unknown.
Yeah. How's that cultivated? How, what factors come about? Is it predictable, or is it spontaneous?
It's interesting. I have so many thoughts about this. Okay, because I feel like there definitely is an element of past life work that contributes to it. So in a way, I think there is a certain degree of you're born into it. There is like this, but I still believe that it can be cultivated as well in this life, and that there's no degree of one level being better than the other, because they all apply to people depending upon where they're at in their journey. And trying to push a person to be super ready over here when they're over here doesn't make sense. And so it's way more beneficial for them to work with where they are. So I think the first thing would really be to admit fully to yourself, like, hey, I'm actually terrified of this unknown thing. It terrifies me. And to start, I think a lot of, when it comes to fear-based blocks or fear-based yeah, I would say blocks. I believe a lot of it is mindset. It's a lot of that social conditioning. It's a lot of the wanting to kind of grasp the tangible reality. It's a lot of overindulgence in our known five senses. You know, some people say there's more than five senses, but for now we'll go with five to go. And so I think it's this grasp onto security, and there's this deep, deep root of safety within it. So when you can start to question your mentality and go, okay, just ask yourself the simple questions of, first off, why do I fear this? Why is this so scary to me? Is it because I don't feel safe going in there? Is it because, I mean, I truly believe it probably all boils down to safety. You know, there might be a little bit of worthiness mixed in there of like, oh, am I ready? Am I worthy of receiving whatever is on that other side of the unknown? But I think that's probably after you get past the safety part of it. And so looking at it then from a more tangible aspect, if somebody's really scared per se to do things that are unknown or that are new, start with the tangible things, right? Maybe you have a fear of getting up on stage and talking in front of a crowd of people. Then it's like, work that first, you know, work if you're very much solidified and kind of holding on to the tangible reality, then work with the tangible reality first. Get comfortable with letting that go, get comfortable with making the leaps in the physical. Because I feel it's kind of like a reverse. I feel like everything spiritually manifests in the physical. And if we want to work something spiritually in this way, we can work with it in the physical first. Or you could do deep unconscious work, that kind of stuff. You know, work with other people to get a better understanding of maybe why this is so scary. But ultimately, I think it would be the most beneficial to start doing the things that scare you in the physical. Because once you do that and you realize, oh, wow, this wasn't as horrible as I thought. You know, this didn't turn out, I didn't die. You know, I did not die. I did not humiliate myself. My life isn't over. Nobody hates me. Once you get past those mental blocks and realize like, wow, it's actually okay. I'm okay. I'm here. I'm breathing. I have food. I have water. I'm okay. Then it starts to build, I would say, that inner courage to go into the spirit realm. But I totally, it's hard though. I still am constantly being met with upper limits. And spirit is sensitive to that. Spirit knows and is, I believe, constantly testing us. Like it was a few months ago, I was laying in bed and I woke up. At least I thought it's debatable what kind of state of mind I was in, but I thought I was waking up because my partner, I thought he was getting into the bed. And so I opened my eyes, and from about a foot above my head to the ceiling, a flash of light came into the window behind us. From a foot above, the entire ceiling was covered in spider webs and spiders. And it was the realest looking thing I had ever seen, to the point where I just instantly, of course, closed my eyes and was freaking out because I was like, how did all these spiders get in here? I'm trying to rationalize, right, this vision. And so it was a test. It was to see what level is she ready for to truly see physically, you know? So having that understanding that a very, like a benevolent spirit that's actually working with you is never going to just toss you in the fire. You know, they're there to work with you step by step. And yes, you may get something that's a little extreme, but depending on how you take it, you'll either be met with that same energy or you'll be back a little bit, you know? So having that energy of knowing you're also supported and that you are divinely guided, that helps a lot as well.
On this specific faculty, the always being sent just as much as you can handle, exactly more than you are comfortable, but never way beyond, right? All on divine timing, as they say. But also there are waves, right? There are waves of like where it becomes much more demanding of you. And then there are stagnant periods where you're wondering, is something weird, gonna come about? Whether the visions bleed into, because this is a whole subject too, like in discussion of reality, what we as human beings experience subjectively versus objectively. If dreams are realer than reality is and feel realer than reality is, then what can we say about reality, right? Or if dreams intersect into reality, what does that say about the nature of dreams?
Yeah.
Um,
All of a sudden, all the lines get blurred.
yes, and I feel like that's where the fear is too, because we have this attachment to gross materiality and certainty therein, and I think that's why it's been so alluring to us as time has progressed, because it has seemingly distinctive boundaries, whereas our emotional landscapes and our inner being is very auric, and the boundaries are not so easy, to ascertain. You mentioned something, there's two things I want to bring up. You mentioned the psychedelic implication in your position. Now, I get asked quite a bit because that's like the hot topic about that. And I don't care to comment on it a lot because I feel like it's this divulgence that can happen where people lean too heavy on it and becomes a culture of itself. And it's really weird what people have done with it. My allegory, and I'm going to spit it out and, cleave it out or agree with it or disagree with it. My approach has been that is a rocket ship, and that is not like that will get the job done, but you have to know where to point it and you have to know how to receive it, and you really have to be in the right place for it. Whereas other methods, via transcendental meditation, via astral projection practice or whatever, this is softer, this is a bit safer, helps you feel out the waters a bit more. But as just a general statement, the over reliance on psychedelic can be somewhat disastrous. I wouldn't put it that dramatically, but I just don't, I don't see it being helpful, if over relied upon. But how would you caveat that, or how would you throw that into the discussion? Because I'm sure in the position somewhat accusatorily, right? Like, that's what you guys do, isn't it? You guys go do ayahuasca, you go do peyote in the desert, right?
Yeah. Right. So, no, 100%. I very much, it's like a direct correlation, like shamanism, plant medicine. And I think people forget too that there are different levels of plant medicine. I've drank mugwort tea before and been taken to underneath the pyramids in Egypt. Like, there's these different levels of working with plants and even just being in their auric field. Like right now I'm growing huachuma in my backyard and I'm working with it, just sitting with it. Sometimes I just stare at the plant. And so there's different levels of doing it. And I think that journeying by actually ingesting, I agree with you completely that it's a rocket ship. It takes you somewhere. And the question is, do you know what to do with that? Do you know how to interpret what you're experiencing? Because I think that I think this is probably one of the most dangerous aspects of the spiritual community I see now. It's that basically everything unseen on the other side is all like love and light. And it's like, yes, at its essence, I do believe it's love and light and it's all there for your growth. But there are beings who want to take advantage of you. There are harmonic beings, there are luciferic beings, which most people aren't familiar with the difference between the two. And there's beings that they want to take advantage with you. So unless you know how to navigate and sort of go into that spiritual realm and really see it with clear vision, to be able to really see what is actually here to assist me and not send me down another curveball, which ultimately I think it does serve you. It just may take you off the route. It's like we're going here. You can go here, you can go over here, you can go way out over here. Mm-hmm. And that's what these other beings that are considered dark or negative or demons, that's their role. It's their role is to send you through as many lessons as you can to get to your point, because they feed off of that energy. And so I think a lot of people can go into these experiences and have a lot of encounters, because what do? You completely open yourself up. You're basically creating
your boundaries are open doors.
They're gone. It's like you just had a house party and everybody is invited. So unless you really know how to go, and that can also be the prominent role of the shaman, is to kind of be that, what's the word I'm looking for? The person that's at the door, like at a party or at a club, is to be that
a bouncer, right?
Yes. To be the bouncer, basically, and allow only in, the ones that are there for the benevolent experience. So that's kind of my take on it, is that I wonder how much of what people are experiencing is truly a benevolent source, because I get that same way with channeling. Channeling is such a hot topic right now. And I don't think people understand how dangerous that is, to willingly give up your body for another being to step in.
Yeah. I'd like to touch on that. I haven't got to talk about that much. So as a reader in town, the town was it's a very thin place where I was. And so there was just all across the board, a lot more recognition culturally of just the woo, but nobody would really like theorize or talk about it, but they all acknowledged it. And so strangely, as a reader, I would become like kind of this, like anything associated with that end, it's like, throw it at him. Right. And so I would have people would come in and they're like, somebody came in, they're asking, my cousin died. And I feel like is following me, is a presence in the house and such. And I feel like I can't understand them. I want you to channel them to speak through you. How much do I pay you for that? And so I found this absurd, because how much could you pay me for that? Like, what do you know what you're asking? You're asking me to effectively die in myself. You're asking me to tease the unknown with my psyche for a whim of yours. How much you can pay me to die? It's absurd.
Yeah.
But also the light integration in artistic communities, I feel like it doesn't get mentioned at all. Because what are you as an artist? You are a muse, you are a conduit of creation and forces beyond recognition. Where does it come from? Where did that idea come from? Where does any idea come from? On the former topic of hallucinogenic practice, at least I think that, if not served as a dharmic and right timing transformative measure, much like a shamanic practice, right? If it's not the right timing, then it's just a light show, and good on you, but I feel like the troubles of the inside are the troubles of the inside. Like, it's reacting to you in every way that you are. So whatever you can't kick up, whatever you can't deal with, is gonna get thrown in your face. So that can be traumatic, and no wonder it's been pretty like hot, culturally speaking, when it comes to the discussion. The other thing that I want to bring up is if you have experienced or run into becoming like what's the word? Emblematic, or becoming like idealized for this like name, position, or like approach, like, since you have this title and you wear for certain communities this cultural badge of credo, right? How how do you relate to that? Like, how do you understand why people do that? And how, if any way, could we like dissolve that kind of like hierarchical approach?
Yeah, kind of I went and did this plant medicine. I'm a more evolved spiritual being. That kind of attitude you're talking about?
That kind of attitude. And in addition, what credo might come with what position you occupy as somebody who's leading, as somebody who's guiding, that's coming to you for guidance, right? The nuances of how they might approach you with a little bit too much ideation, right? Or expectation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I totally feel you on this. I think, well, the first thing that I recognize is that anybody who believes that they're on some sort of spiritual hierarchy, or I'm better than this person, or I'm more evolved because of that, like that is pure intellect speaking. That is not wisdom whatsoever. And so in a way, that person is almost less evolved, but it's so hard to explain this, but yet I can see it. I'm very good at picturing what I want to say.
This is where the meat and potatoes really are. So yes, of course it's hard to poetically express.
Where it's this, because there is an evolution, right? There is almost this linear path of growth that happens, but there is no hierarchy to it. There is no one point is better than another. I view them as simply they're different, right? They're different. And it's like, if I'm over here and you're over here, this is perfect for me and this is perfect for you. So you can't even really compare the two, because it's all about, we're on such individual journeys as well as these the collective journey. But yet there's this individual journey that really cannot be compared to anything. The only thing it can be compared to is where I was a year ago and like where I'm going to be next year. So it's like we can only in reality compete with ourselves, because nobody else is experiencing life the same as, nobody's viewing life the same as anyone else. As much as we think we kind of understand each other, it's actually impossible to view life the way another person views life, because we are so influenced both by our society, our conditioning, as well as spirit. It really is this blend of the two. And so I went through a period of kind of balancing, what are there expectations that people have of me? If I step out and have this, is there going to be this expectation that I serve plant medicine or that I've done plant medicine? And if I claim to be a shaman and I say, oh, I've never even done plant medicine, are people just going to laugh at me? Right? Because there is such a strong tie with those two worlds being blended together. And ultimately, it's just a lot of it boils back down to this developing my own inner authority and getting so crystal clear and in a way confident with who I am, that I recognize any judgment that another person has, it's not an actual reality of who I am. It's a projection of their own thought. It's their own conditioning. So I could go, if somebody said that to me, if somebody laughed in my face and said, you've never even done ayahuasca and you're a shaman, they laughed at my face, I could take that one of two ways. One could be like, oh my gosh, I could sink into it and be like, oh gosh, this person is so right. How dare I do this? I'm such a sham. I'm such an imposter. That's like, and that's probably the one most people would go into. Or I can go, wow, it's really interesting to see how this person is revealing to me the conditions and the expectations that they have in relation to that word. It's really interesting to see how they've been brought up to see this as such a narrow little box. Mm-hmm. And if I was in their shoes and I saw it that way, I'd probably think it was funny too, So it's being able to separate their judgment and realize it actually has nothing to do with me. I'm simply the mirror that gets to bring it to them. And so then now they have the opportunity to go, wow, did I just laugh at that person for that? Did I just judge them for that? Or they'll stick with believing it and continue on with their life the way that they are.
So, of course, logic wouldn't necessarily be the best retort, or knowledge wouldn't necessarily be the best retort to somebody approaching in such a way. But it is to say that shamanically speaking, the practice is most rooted in trance states, dead stop, you know, trance states, and is most often married to the drum or music of some volition, and in reasonable percentage, but certainly not a majority percentage, ascribes the intake of psychotropic sacred medicine, but all work with, in the green witchcraft kind of way, which is something I wanted to get back to, work with spirits, because spirit is everywhere. And to have to procure one particular relationship with spirit is terribly obscure, because it's very broad, right? It's very broad. Like, and I've tried to break this down. They have the church and it's frankincense and myrrh, you know, like what's up with the frankincense and myrrh? Do they not have a spirit and essence of themselves? Are they not speaking through the scent and the auric, you know, energy or whatever, you know? Sweetgrass, you know, even these candles, you know, you're gonna light some sage, right? Like, are any of these things? And also what food you're eating, food, you are made of their beingness, you are made of essence, right? At all times, you know, you are influenced, you are an accumulation of all these, a buffet of phenomena. Yeah, so there's only so many ways to retort, but that whole note about being a mirror, because if you're operating at a post where, you know, you're acting as a guide, from my end, I get asked, what do you think about this very particular subject? And it's like, I don't know everything. I don't know everything. I'm a human being. You know, I have to like do bills and shit, you know, like right. And it's that contrast, right? Like it's really, you have the shiny thing, and that's hard. It's hard. So although I could easily continue barraging you, I wanted to throw it back and see if you had any questions for me or anything that you'd like to discuss from your post.
Yeah. So I'm super curious, just from your experience in life, you know, having really dove into research upon these types of topics, how do you bridge? Because usually I would say a lot of people, when they know kind of the traditional, they can kind of get stuck in that's the way it is or that's the way it should be. But yet you're so open, you know, to the transformation, to the change of it. So I'm interested to hear about your take on sort of just the evolution of these traditions and what you like, if you have any specific aspects, you know, that you've seen shift or that you've experienced shift, how you share about those.
Oh, that's very big. So the first approach is on the openness. And I've tried to use the allegory before. Not everybody did debate club when they were coming up in like high school or something. It's lawyer training effectively. And there's this specific disposition that you have where you're not including the personal, you are just investigating the idea, right? Could I argue this point? Could I argue this point? And my specific dharmic disposition was that I was a peacekeeper. I had two older siblings that are polarized in their approach of the world. And I had parents that were also very polarized in their approach of the world. And so instead of going down one alley, I always felt that I was in all alleys. And so from a childhood innate, I always had to be able to agree. Yes, I agree with you. And I agree with you. Even if this means that you both can't agree, I understand where you're both coming from. And that hurts me terribly. So then came the investigation of the study. And the study was like my own shattering of the dichotomy that I was given as a child. And it was a dramatic shatter. And it happened for me at 11. And it was a moment. It was one moment. And it all came down like a house of cards, which meant I had no guide. And so there was that courage aspect and my vicariousness to ask about it, right? Because at that point, I had to find it. I had to seek. And it's been that way ever since. And so it's never about like, oh, I have found the answer. It's always been that the answer is this elusive, multifarious, multispectral happenstance, you know, that doesn't come when I try to grab it by the tail like the dragon, you know. When it comes to traditions, though, I mean, there's a lot to say about the synthesis of like studying all these traditions and like especially studying the beginnings of religion all the way up until what's become, and trying to always contrast and compare and see how these boundaries are not rigid. You know, they are open doors as well. They come across like they're rigid because of its merriment with politic and merriment with superiority and hierarchy and power, most importantly. Getting off on operating on a spiritual post, and that I know and that you have to listen to me and the ego that can come with that. But overall, you know, as a synthesis, it is of course the self, and it is of course like our investigation. You know, if we have classic stories, the hero's journey, the mythic story was always about the hero's journey. You are the hero, you know, you are the one pushing through the unknown, the ineffability of the phenomenon of reality that you have nothing to know about it and you're trying anyway. That's the hero's journey, triumph. And honestly, I'm just a bit of a nerd too. I just like having the different words. My main fascination was like, there are the same words in different traditions for the same thing, but just put differently. And so then came like, okay, if I need to communicate this, I found when very sincere Christian people, very sincere, like would come at you and say like God, Jesus, right? It would immediately like put up walls because of the cultural associations. And that's justified. Historically, that's a justified response. However, if you just put it another way, if you just put it a different way that's more palpable, then you could actually access that part in somebody, and you're not overly specifying it. You know, you're not making it so culturally niche that it won't reach them. And what this is all about is that we connect and that we understand and that we feel seen. And that's the advantage of trying to seek all these different traditions, is trying to seek all the different ways it can be put, and also working the spiritual religious terminology into common speech to the point where it's palpable and understandable, and not this like, that's wooey,
esoteric.
that's wooey.
Yeah.
And that's like my biggest, that's been my biggest issue, is like talking about the gods, you know, like, so you're telling me you don't believe in the gods. Are you also telling me you've never seen the sun? Are you telling me that you've never seen the moon, that you've never felt anything about the moon? You know, are you telling me that you've never felt the characteristic of a like warm wind on a summer day? You know, these are the gods. These are the gods, right? Like that star, you know, that star, it exists, right? You see it. What does it feel like? It's the gods. And so dissolving it, that's been the main challenge. Oh gosh, I know I'm ranting, but the last thing I want to throw out, and then I want to see what you think about it, is like, it's always about this relationship with the sacred too. And I feel like the age that we are in is suffering with throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to spiritual traditions and religiosity. And it's justified because it's been used for power and it's been co-opted a long time ago, and we're far, far off the path. However, the baby was in the bathwater, and that baby was the sacred. And since we don't have the sacred, that's why we're seeing what we have here: exploitation, desolation, nihilism, this terribly bland scientism, materialism. It's horrible. how to, if anything you can do, tease at the sacred in society and let people invent their own sacredness. Because when it's taken up by institutions, then it becomes like, this is sanctioned and this is not sanctioned. We have good words and we have bad words, right? It's like, no, you create the sacred, right? You are the progenitor of meaning and sacredness into this world, and recognize, have some gratitude. Anyway, like, on that discussion of the sacred, I'd like to throw that back to you, and like your relation with it, how you, well, not necessarily your relation, but how you contextualize that, you know, how that is palpable for you, or how that has like come into your personal journey, and also how you would try to define it for other.
Yeah. Ooh. Okay. Well, first I want to reflect that I really honor that I get this sense, in a way, you've been very much a bridge, like whether between your family, whether it be between these old traditions and the new. I very much get this sense that you're like this very, in a way, like a sacred bridge between two realms that may not normally cross, but yet they now have this common link. So I just want to reflect that and just say that I honor and see that in
archetypally you. I'm grateful. Archetypally, the world can use a lot of unity, you know, unification, right? And so how does that work on a practical level? And that's what you do on a practical level. You know, you try to make people understood, you try to bring people together for what you can, and
Yeah.
that's the sum total of what you can do, you know, within your own arms and within your own reach.
I love that so much. Yes. And then on terms of what you asked in terms of the sacred, so are you curious about, I guess, my experience or my viewpoint of, I guess, our relation as humans with the sacred?
I would like you to muse about it, whatever comes most naturally in that discussion of the sacred.
Yeah. So the first thing that popped into my head was that, I'm going to butcher this, I don't know where it's from. I'm kind of just pulling out of the ether, but and I don't know dates. Maybe you can do some more research about this and actually be able to back up what I'm going to say. So now we hear this common term, which is mind, body, soul, right? Like everything is mind, body, soul, mind, body, soul. And historically, it was body, soul, spirit. But yet there's, and I totally forget it. I wish I knew the exactness of it. There's a very specific event, may have been a biblical event, I'm not 100% sure, that there was overall this kind of agenda to remove spirit. And so then came in mind, body, soul. And now I feel like we're at this evolution where in a way there is this attack kind of upon soul. So it's like that next level. How do we get rid of soul now and just become mind and body? And so I think that that's a lot of what we're seeing right now based upon difference, you know, whether it be certain advancements in technology, that kind of stuff. I really see it as this overarching attack upon soul, because there is this understanding that we're moving into a space where spirit's becoming more integrated back in, right? So it's like spirit was taken away and now spirit's starting to come back in. So it's trying to get severed at that soul level, because that's kind of the connection there. And so, and it's so interesting just being so observational of humanity right now. It feels like we've never been so close to being so spiritually collectively united, and at the same time so materialistic. And so the question that I come with is, is it this blend of the two? How do we, because we're in a material world, like that is just a facet of, to at least our understanding. We could get into the thin line between dreams and all that, but here we are, material world, very physical, all that kind of stuff. And so it's like, okay, how do we stop identifying so much with these things, or like the need for them, and incorporate more of that sacredness into them and recognize it all as tools? And it's like, We don't need any of it, but at the same time, they are very, very integrated, like integral tools that can benefit us on our journey here in the physical. I truly believe that part of our purpose in incarnating is because there's just certain lessons that we can only learn here on earth because of the natures of our reality as humans, being in these physical bodies, of having this identity, but yet this collective consciousness. It's like so many opposing aspects of our reality that makes up the human experience. And so the closer we get back into recognizing that it is all sacred, it is all from source, universe, whatever it is, it is all the same thing. When we see all these different religions debating about terminology, like you said, when you look at it at this foundational core level, it's the same thing. It's like how a lot of Christian ideology would burn the witch at the stake, yet every holiday is based in paganism, so it's this interesting perspective of if we simply learn to question our own reality and be open to receiving others, we start to realize how much synchronicity there is and how much spirit is within everything. And yeah, so that's sort of I'm gonna stop there. That's where my mind was leading me.
Two things, and then I think we can wrap it up.
Mm-hmm.
You used the word spirit quite a bit, and I feel that is one of those terms, that's one I've had to really like hammer to define and to like make it palpable for people. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but if somebody was like, what do you mean? What do you mean when you say spirit? How could you attempt to elucidate that for somebody?
Yeah. So what comes to me is spirit. It's this life force energy, right? It is this natural source of divine intelligence, not intellect, intelligence that recognizes or just really everything is made up of.
So a kind of universal substance, or a kind of like inherent potentiation to anything that exists, right? Like the thing that makes anything possible.
Right. It's like what gives it, it's almost what gives it its vibration to exist here. It's like the foundation of its existence, whether it's seen or unseen. It's sort of that generation of power or of energy that I would say gives it life.
Mana, chi, anima, the vita.
Yeah, exactly.
And the soul, that's the other one, right? So how would you distinguish, if at all, soul from spirit? And which of these two is most likened to mind, if at all?
That's interesting.
Hardball.
Okay.
Hardball.
I'm going to answer the second part of that question first and say that it's interesting because I can feel the tug of war in my head that's going against what I'm about to say, but I'm going to go with what I feel. And that is that the mind is actually more linked to spirit than we understand. But I believe that the mind tries to interpret the intelligence through intellect and tries to attach story to it, tries to attach the duality to it,
rips it down, it translates.
Yeah.
But it's not a great translator.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly the way I see it. And then in terms of soul versus spirit is like what connects us, I would say. And soul is kind of that first inkling of individuality, I would say. I mean, there's different levels to that because like we have the the etheric body. I work with the etheric body a lot. That's what I see. And it's like you can think of the etheric body like a memory card. It holds information pertaining to that individual's soul and kind of its overarching link spirit wise. I'm not sure if I'm explaining.
A rough collection.
Yeah.
A rough, like little amalgamation of spirit.
Right.
Kind of somehow like caught and codified in a certain way, somehow. I had a theory, and this might be interesting, like in astrology and in the ancient, like like Greek mysticism, the Eleusinian mysteries and such, the idea was this panspermismos, meaning spirit is everywhere. So when we take our first breath, to the astrologer, that's the moment we measure. We don't measure conception, right? We focus on when someone's born. And so that breath is that moment is the codification of spirit, or as an idea, right, into soul. That moment is somebody being dragged through time. You are that moment dragged forward in time, which is a pretty trippy way. But you did bring out, you know, this I don't know if it's belief, but your observation of like what you called like a migration of a soul into your body in a near-death experience, or the transfer, right?
Yeah.
There's also like a nebulousness to that overall, because it's to say like, am I me when I wake up in the morning? Am I the same me? Or is this like, am I always being rotated out? Because I would have these like specific instances in life where I'm like, it's always at a cafe and I'm alone and I'm just sitting there, and then it's like, you know, like this like intense, very sudden self-awareness where it's like, oh shit, yeah, my name's Connor, I think. I'm, you know, X years old, I'm in this place, this is the job I do, you know, as if I'm like becoming
reintegrating.
Yes, if soul is water and the personality is the specific curvatures of my mind and annals of my inner being, then water is water. It's not me. It fills whatever circuitry is made, right? Just as like some wooey, like
I love it. I love the visual. I see it.
Yeah. But anyhow, it's been a tremendous pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure. Absolutely love diving into all the things.
Love to have you back.